The United States is one of the largest countries in the world. It takes approximately 45 hours of non-stop driving, or 6 days in 8-hour shifts, to get from the east to the west, a distance that spans over 2,800 miles. At the same time, the US also has the third highest population, behind only India and China, and is the world's biggest economy by gross domestic product. All of these statistics combined have given rise to an important question. Why is it that such a highly successful country, with a flourishing population and massive surface area, still relies on congested highways and cramped airlines to travel from one end to the other? Countries like Japan and China, and more recently, even developing nations like Morocco and Brazil, have been reaping the benefits of fully operational high-speed railway networks. For years, faster train lines have been proven to boost economic development, create more jobs, offer a more sustainable way to travel, and of course improve inner-city mobility. We often see trains across Asia, South America, Europe, and Oceania that can regularly exceed speeds of 150 miles per hour. Some, such as the Shanghai Transrapid, are even known to go faster than 300 miles per hour. The US, on the other hand, only has one high-speed rail service. Amtrak's Arcella has a top speed of 150 miles per hour, but operates over a very limited area. And that's pretty much it for the near future as well. Most upcoming projects either aren't fast enough to compete with some of the trains in other developed countries, or have been facing massive delays. Surprisingly, the United States has the most railway lines of any country in the world, far more than China, the second country on the list. But while China built around 26,000 miles of dedicated high-speed railway lines between 2008 and 2023, the US built a mere 375 miles. As a result, when Americans think about train travel, it mostly takes the form of nostalgic images. Most trains in the country have been used to transport freight, goods like coal, timber, and oil, after all. One of the first reasons for this follows World War II, when the automobile industry began to take off, and a majority of the infrastructure budget went into building the highways that country and folk musicians are always singing about. Cars have since been a staple of American culture. And it's not a coincidence, as some have pointed out, that one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the world is Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla, and films such as Fast and the Furious franchise do so well at the box office. The American love for automobiles is one of the most glaring reasons why high-speed passenger railway projects took a backseat. But it's far from being the only one. The automobile boom has also created what observers call a suburban sprawl. This is a phenomenon that describes how American families have a tendency to move to large properties in the suburbs, far from the city center. In contrast, European countries, designed long before the advent of automobiles, tend to favor walking more. Consequently, they have more well-defined centers where both commercial and residential buildings are in close proximity, as well as a clearer idea of where the central railway station should go. Even if the US did have several stations connected to a high-speed rail network, its citizens would still have to rely on cars to get from there to their homes in the suburbs, since most cities lack the required metro connectivity. This has created a problem with no simple solution. Where does the US put its high-speed train stations? At the same time, construction in the US is not cheap. Even though the country is mostly made up of relatively flat land, it still costs more to build transport infrastructure than in countries that are forced to build long tunnels through mountains and under bodies of water. In fact, the United States is the sixth most expensive country to build rapid rail transit infrastructure, with projects often exceeding budgets by millions of dollars. There's no obvious reason for this. The 5 countries that rank higher than the US, such as Singapore or New Zealand, are building projects that are more than 80% tunneled, while in the US, only 37% of the total track length must be tunneled. Among the factors that contribute to these high costs are a lack of practice in building infrastructure, as well as the opposition that projects face from various stakeholders. To make matters worse, contractors also struggle to secure land in straight paths, which is essential to build high-speed networks. The reason for this is the US's strong property rights, which makes buying land very expensive, especially when compared to countries like China, where land is primarily controlled by the government. And lastly, we're left with a problem that experts like Louis Thompson, the railway advisor to the World Bank, identified as far back as the 90s: low population density. Thompson found that high-speed rail networks aren't financially viable in areas with low population density because there aren't enough people using them. And indeed, if you've ever traveled through the country, you've probably noticed that a vast majority of the US is full of empty spaces of land. This gives it a relatively low population density of less than 100 people per square mile, compared to countries like Japan, which have over 800 people per square mile. The same applies to US cities as well. Even though it has some of the world's most crowded and well-known cities, the population density doesn't compare to places like Shanghai, Seoul, or the European capitals like Paris. This makes building high-speed railways not only less economically viable, but also more unlikely to get political backing and the support of the people. All of these individual factors, combined with the fact that the US has some of the cheapest airline carriers and an extensive network of airports, are just some of the examples of why it is so challenging to construct a high-speed rail network in the country. Just take a look at any of the luxury passenger trains introduced in the last 100 years. Even famous railroads, such as the New York Central, have eventually gone bankrupt. But could this change soon? In 2020, a meme posted to Twitter with a map of a high-speed rail network in the US revealed that Gen Z is dreaming about high-speed train revolutions that will help lower the carbon footprint of the country's two favored modes of transport. It was shared over 50,000 times. A couple of years later, US President Joe Biden announced a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, of which just $66 billion was set aside for passenger rail infrastructure. So, will this newfound public demand and federal interest finally be enough to give the US its very own high-speed rail network? Only time will tell.